My own son poured tea over my head. Hot, bitter tea running down my face, dripping onto the kitchen floor I had mopped that very morning. Then he looked at me, his own mother, and said, 5 minutes. You've got 5 minutes to leave my house. 5 minutes. That's how long it took to end 28 years of motherhood. Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed. And tell me where you're watching this story from. My name is Margaret Collins, and if you had met me 10 years ago, you'd have called me the proudest mother alive. Back then, I lived for one reason, my son, Daniel. After my husband, Richard, passed away in a factory accident, Daniel was all I had left. He was only 10, too young to understand death, yet old enough to notice the way I hid my tears behind coffee cups. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment near the railway line. Every morning, the whistle would shake the windows, and I would whisper, "Another day, another chance, Danny." I worked long shifts at a dry cleaning shop, ironing strangers' clothes while my own hands cracked from detergent. Still, I never complained. Each time I came home to find Daniel waiting with 2 cups of tea and that crooked grin of his, the world felt whole again. He'd sit beside me, swinging his legs, telling me about school, how he helped a classmate, how he wanted to be an engineer like his dad. I'd listen, exhausted yet grateful, and say, "You will be, Daniel. You'll build things that last." I thought I was raising a good man, and for many years, I truly was. Seasons passed like the turning pages of an old photo album. Daniel graduated college on a spring afternoon when the air smelled of lilacs and pride. He wore a borrowed suit, but his smile made him look like a millionaire. When he threw his graduation cap into the air, I remember thinking, this is what every sleepless night was for. That evening, we celebrated with leftover cake and cheap sparkling juice. He lifted his glass and said, "To you, Mom, my first engineer." I laughed, not understanding what he meant. He explained, "You built me." Those words stayed with me like a prayer. A few years later, Daniel got a job in the city, a good one, designing bridges and roads. He rented an apartment, then met a young woman named Clara. She was polite, graceful, and at first, I liked her instantly. When Daniel brought her over for dinner the first time, she complimented everything, my cooking, my dress, even my old curtains. I remember thinking, my boy has finally found someone kind. They married a year later, and for a while, everything was perfect. Daniel called every day. They visited every weekend. He'd hug me and say, "Clara says you make the best shepherd's pie in the world." And she'd laugh, "He's not lying, Mrs. Collins. I thought I'd gained a daughter." Then came the pandemic. Daniel's office closed, rent got expensive, and he asked if they could move in with me, just for a few months. Of course, I said yes. What mother wouldn't? The first few weeks were lovely. We cooked together, watched movies, played board games. I'd wake up early and make tea for all of us. Clara loved green tea. Daniel loved mine, strong with a bit of ginger. But slowly, I noticed the changes, tiny, creeping, almost invisible. At breakfast, they started whispering to each other. When I entered the room, conversation stopped. Clara began tidying the house obsessively, moving my things without asking. Once, she took down my wedding photo and replaced it with a modern, abstract print. I put the photo back the next morning. By evening, it was gone again. When I asked Daniel, he sighed, "Mom, Clara's just redecorating." Don't take it personally, so I smiled. "Of course, dear." But that night, I cried quietly, staring at the bare patch on the wall where my memories used to live. Weeks turned into months. The house I'd opened to them no longer felt like mine. One evening, I overheard Clara talking on the phone. Her voice was hushed, annoyed. "She's sweet, but it's suffocating, Luke. Daniel. I can't even walk from the bedroom to the kitchen without her asking if I've eaten. It's too much." She didn't know I was standing just behind the door. Her words hit harder than any slap. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Maybe I love too loudly." Still, I told myself it was temporary. Young couples need space. I'd give them that. I started eating alone in my room, leaving them to have dinners together. When Daniel asked why, I lied and said I was dieting. But love, when ignored, turns into silence. And silence can break the strongest bond. Months later, Daniel and Clara bought a new house, a beautiful 2-story place on the outskirts of town. He called one afternoon, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Mom, we did it. We finally bought our own home. But we'd love for you to move in with us for a while until you find something nearby." I hesitated. "Are you sure, darling?" "I don't want to intrude. You could never intrude," he said. "You're family." Those words melted every doubt. I packed my things the next week. The new house was modern, spacious. White marble counters, tall windows, the faint smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. They gave me the guest room overlooking the garden. Clara smiled and said, "I hope you'll feel comfortable here." I believed her. I wanted to. For the first few weeks, I lived in a quiet rhythm, watering the plants, knitting by the window, cooking dinner before they got home. Daniel would often kiss my forehead and say, "It smells like home in here, Mom." But gradually, the warmth faded again. Clara started coming home late. Daniel stopped talking during dinner. When I'd ask how their day was, Clara would answer for both of them. "It was fine, Mrs. Collins." "We're just tired, Mrs. Collins. Not Mom, not Margaret, just Mrs. Collins." The distance was slow and polite, the kind that hurts most because you can't point to when it began. One morning, I decided to make Daniel his favorite tea, strong, with honey and a touch of ginger. I thought it might remind him of simpler days, but when I carried the cup to the living room, Clara wrinkled her nose. "Oh, that smell again." Ginger. She turned to Daniel. "Could you please tell your mom not to make that anymore?" "It makes me nauseous." Daniel glanced between us, unsure. "Maybe just don't make it for a while, Mom." I froze, cup trembling in my hand. He didn't mean it cruelly, but it landed cruelly anyway. I nodded, smiled, and said softly, "Of course." But later that night, while washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. A tired woman with lines under her eyes and hands that had worked too long. And I whispered, "Maybe they don't need me anymore." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft, hesitant, like the sky was unsure whether to cry. In that moment, I felt the same. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the last time I'd ever feel at home under my son's roof. It was a Sunday morning. Soft rain outside, the kind that makes the world smell clean again. I woke early, made breakfast, and decided to surprise them with cinnamon rolls. The oven filled the house with warmth. For a moment, it felt like old times. When I carried the tray to the table, Clara was already there, scrolling her phone. She didn't look up. "Morning, sweetheart," I said. "Daniel still asleep?" She sighed. "No, he's in the study. Working." I smiled. "On a Sunday? Some of us don't have the luxury of baking all day." Her tone sliced through me, polite but poisoned. I set the tray down, pretending not to hear. A few minutes later, Daniel came in, shirt half-tucked, eyes tired. He looked at the rolls, then at me. "You baked again?" he said. "Yes, your favorite." He rubbed his temples. "Mom, we talked about this. Clara's on a diet and the smell sticks to everything. It's just cinnamon, dear. It'll fade." He exhaled long and heavy, like my words weighed more than air. Clara stood, crossed her arms. "See? She never listens." I turned to her. "I was only trying to make—" "Enough!" Daniel's voice cracked like glass. The room went still. He picked up his mug of tea, my tea, and said through clenched teeth, Why do you keep doing this? Making things harder? You don't belong here anymore. My throat closed. Daniel, what are you saying? I'm saying it's time you moved out. The mug shook in his hand. I tried to reach for him. Son, please, let's not. And that's when he did it. He threw the tea, not in anger that he could control, but in frustration that owned him. It splashed over my face, my hair, my clothes. The smell of ginger, his favorite, filled the air as steam rose between us. He whispered, "You've got 5 minutes, Mom." 5 minutes to pack and leave. I stood frozen. The clock on the wall ticked louder than my heartbeat. 5 minutes. The world blurred. Clara didn't move. She just watched, her expression unreadable. Hot tea dripped from my chin onto the tiled floor, forming small brown puddles. I looked at him. This man I'd carried in my body, cradled through fevers, prayed for in hospital waiting rooms, and all I could whisper was, 5 minutes. That's all I get? He didn't answer. He just turned away. I went upstairs, every step heavier than the last. My hands shook as I opened the wardrobe. Inside hung a lifetime. My late husband's old coat, Daniel's childhood drawings, a silk scarf Clara once said looked outdated. I packed only what I could carry. A few clothes, a photo of Richard holding baby Daniel, and my mother's silver bracelet. By the time I zipped the suitcase, my 5 minutes were gone. I walked downstairs. Daniel was by the window, phone in hand, pretending to read messages. Clara stood beside him, arms folded. Neither looked at me. I placed the house keys on the table. "Thank you for letting me stay," I said, voice trembling. Daniel said nothing. Clara murmured, "It's for the best." I stepped out into the rain. It felt cold, but at least it was honest. The street was empty, shining wet under gray clouds. I walked with my suitcase until the house disappeared behind me. That beautiful house I'd helped them buy, now belonging to silence. At the corner, my knees gave out. I sat on a bus stop bench, rain dripping from my hair onto my lap. For a long time, I just stared at my hands, wrinkled, reddened, trembling. They had once built a home. Now they were empty. People passed without looking. One woman glanced, hesitated, then hurried away. I realized in that moment how invisible old women become. When the bus finally came, I didn't even know where I was going. I just got on. I rode until the city turned into suburbs, until raindrops turned to mist against the glass. Every house that passed looked warmer than mine. At the last stop, the driver said, "End of the line, ma'am." I nodded and stepped off into a small town I'd never seen before. There was a cafe across the street. Faded awning, handwritten open sign. The smell of coffee and baked bread drew me inside. A young waitress looked up. "Rain caught you, huh?" I smiled faintly. "You could say that." She handed me a towel and a cup of tea. Not ginger, but chamomile. Something inside me broke at that kindness. As I sat near the window, an older woman approached. She wore a floral apron and the kindest eyes. "I'm Nora," she said, "owner here." "You traveling?" "Not really," I murmured. "Just leaving." She nodded like she understood the kind of leaving that isn't about distance. "Well, you can rest here a while." No charge I wanted to refuse, but my body said yes before my mouth did. That night, Nora offered her guest room above the cafe. The walls smelled of vanilla and rain. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for footsteps outside my door. Days turned into weeks. I started helping Nora around the cafe, washing dishes, folding napkins, brewing tea. She paid me in meals and smiles. One afternoon, she found me staring at the teapot. "Still thinking about whoever hurt you?" she asked. I nodded. It was my son. She didn't look shocked, just sad. Children forget sometimes, she said softly. They forget the hands that raised them until life teaches them why those hands mattered. Her words lingered like the scent of jasmine. Meanwhile, Daniel's absence stretched like an echo I couldn't silence. Every time the doorbell rang downstairs, my heart leapt, foolishly hoping it was him, but it never was. Instead, I heard from an old neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, who called after seeing a social media post. "Margaret, are you all right? I saw Daniel and his wife listed the house for sale." My breath caught. "They're selling?" "Yes, moving abroad," I think I thanked her, ended the call and sat in the dark for a long while. So that was it. Even the walls that knew my laughter were being erased. That night, I took out my journal and wrote, "I gave him everything. He gave me 5 minutes." But the truth I didn't write, the one I whispered only to the stars outside the window, was this. And yet, I still love him. One evening, Nora brought in the mail. "There's a letter for you," she said. "No return address." I frowned. Hardly anyone knew where I was. Inside the envelope was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was familiar. Daniel's. It said only 6 words. "Mom, please call me." "I'm sorry," my hand shook as I read it again and again. Tears blurred the ink until it ran like rainwater. I whispered into the quiet room, "It's too late, Daniel, isn't it?" But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That letter was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. A reckoning, a healing, a return I hadn't dared hope for. I read that letter over and over until dawn. 6 words. "Mom, please call me. I'm sorry." They sounded like rain after drought, like sunlight you're afraid to believe is real. For 2 days I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you answer the child who broke you? On the 3rd morning, I dialed his number. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang once, twice. Then his voice, soft, tired, nothing like the last time I'd heard it. "Mom?" I couldn't speak. He said again, "Mom, please don't hang up." "I'm here," I whispered. "Daniel, what is it?" He took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to start." I've been thinking about that day. Every night, I see your face when I close my eyes. I felt my throat tighten. "You hurt me, Daniel. You poured tea over me. You told me to leave." His voice broke. "I know, and I deserve your anger, but please let me explain." Silence filled the line. The kind of silence that sits between 2 people who love each other, but have forgotten how to say it. He continued, "After you left, everything fell apart." Clara couldn't stand the guilt. She said she'd never forgive herself for what we did. "She left, Mom. She left me." My heart ached, but I stayed quiet. She said I let her turn me against my own mother. And she was right. I was angry. Not at you, at myself. I felt trapped. I wanted to prove I could take care of her, that I wasn't a child anymore, but instead I became cruel. I wiped my tears, whispering, "Daniel, no reason in this world can justify what you did." "I know," he said. "That's why I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room reminded me of you." His voice cracked again. "I don't expect forgiveness. I want to see you." Please, I closed my eyes. The image of him as a boy flashed in my mind. The little hands that once clung to mine crossing the street. And before I could stop myself, I said, "All right, tomorrow, noon, the cafe on Oak Street." He let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Mom." When I hung up, my hands were still trembling, but something inside me had shifted. The bitterness that had lived in my chest began to melt, slowly, painfully, like frost surrendering to light. The next day, the sky was clear, painfully clear, the kind that makes everything look sharper. I wore my best blue dress, the one Daniel bought for my birthday years ago. Nora insisted on coming with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. When I entered the cafe, Daniel was already there. Sitting by the window, hair slightly longer, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. He stood as soon as he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "You look well, Mom." I smiled faintly. "And you look like a man who's finally learned to make his own tea." That broke the tension. He laughed softly, wiping a tear. "Still ginger," he said. We sat down. The waitress brought us tea, and for a while we just listened to the clinking of cups, the hum of quiet conversation around us. Finally, he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." I nodded. "I know." He looked at me with desperation. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No one ever does," I said gently. "That's what makes it forgiveness." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine, hesitant, trembling. I let him take it. His fingers were warm, shaking. "I miss you," he whispered. "I missed you too, Daniel," I said. "But missing someone isn't enough. You have to remember who you are, who we were." He nodded, tears falling freely now. "I forgot. I let someone else's voice drown yours out." "No," I said softly. "You let your fear speak louder than love." He bowed his head. "Can I ever come home?" I took a slow sip of my tea, felt the warmth spread through me, and said, "Home isn't a place, Daniel. It's a choice. You can start over, if you're willing to rebuild, not repeat." He nodded, clutching my hand tighter. "Then I'll spend my life rebuilding." When I left the cafe that day, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt light. The storm was over. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd finally let go of the weight that wasn't mine to carry anymore. Weeks turned into months. Daniel began visiting every weekend. At first, we just talked about simple things, work, weather, recipes. But slowly, the walls fell away. He started helping at Nora's cafe, repairing shelves, fixing lights, learning to make proper tea again. People liked him. Quiet, kind, humble. I watched him grow into the man I'd always hoped he'd become. One afternoon, he came to me with a small envelope. "Mom," he said, "I sold what was left from the house. It's not much, but I want you to have it." I shook my head. "No, Daniel, I don't need it." He smiled sadly. "Then use it for something you love. Something that's yours." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch under the soft hum of crickets, holding that envelope. Inside was a note. It read, "For the woman who built homes out of hearts." I cried quietly, not from pain this time, but from gratitude. A year passed. Daniel rented a small apartment nearby. He'd visit every Sunday bringing groceries and sometimes flowers. On one of those Sundays, he arrived with a nervous smile and a surprise. "Mom," he said, "I want you to meet someone." Behind him stood a woman, gentle eyes, modest dress, shy smile. "This is Elena," he said softly. She knows everything, and she still stayed." Elena stepped forward. "Mrs. Collins, Daniel's told me so much about you. I'd like to learn your cinnamon roll recipe. He says no one makes them like you." I smiled. "Then you'll fit right in, dear." That afternoon, the house was filled with laughter again. Real laughter, the kind that echoes off walls that once held sorrow. When Daniel left that evening, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you, Mom." I whispered back, "Then don't ever forget who you are." Years later, when Daniel had his first child, a little girl named Grace, he brought her to visit me. The moment she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, I felt something complete inside my chest. The circle had closed, not perfectly, but beautifully. Daniel leaned close and said, "I still think about that day, Mom. The tea, the 5 minutes, I can't forgive myself. I touched his cheek gently. Then let me do it for you. I forgive you. Completely. He closed his eyes, tears falling onto my hand, and for the first time since that awful morning, I saw peace in his face. As he left, I stood by the window watching him hold little Grace's hand, just like I once held his, and I whispered, 5 minutes once ended everything, but love gave us forever. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of ginger tea, smiling through tears. The same tea that once ended a chapter, now began a new one. Did you like this story? Tell me which city you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what love and forgiveness truly mean. Because sometimes all it takes is 5 minutes to destroy everything or to rebuild it from the start. With love and respect, Margaret Collins.